Much to talk about. Let's get straight to our panel. Joining us from London is Baraa Shiban. He's Yemeni and focuses on the Middle East and North Africa for the human rights group Reprieve. Fahad Nazer is an international affairs fellow at the National Council on U.S. Arab Relations and a consultant to the Saudi embassy here in Washington, D.C. With us from Brighton, England is Catherine Shakdam. She is a Middle East political analyst and the program director at the Shafaqna Institute for Middle Eastern Studies. And joining us here in Washington, D.C. is the former United States ambassador to Yemen, Stephen Seche. He's currently the executive vice president of the Arab Gulf States Institute. If we can end up at the end of this program with a better understanding of what any kind of Saudi pullback from this war might look like, then we will have achieved something, I think. Let's begin with these emails, which apparently came from the defense minister, the Crown Prince, to a leading Washington think tank person who might have been very, very big in the Clinton administration had she won the election last November. Fahad, you don't speak for the Saudi government, but you know the way that they think. What do you make of those emails?
Well, I mean, I won't comment about what are obviously private emails. What I will say is that the Saudi officials have been very consistent from the beginning of this conflict. They have said that this was a war of necessity, not a war of choice. I think Saudi Arabia tried everything it could to help usher in a peaceful transition after President Saleh was toppled or was ousted and had to resign in 2011. And even after the Houthis resorted to violence in 2014 and used force, the Saudi government still called for a conference to try to prevent the conflict from further spreading. So frankly, it shouldn't come as a surprise that the Saudi government wants this violence to end. It is well aware that the violence has taken a heavy toll on Yemen, but frankly, it has also taken a toll on Saudi Arabia itself. There's been a few hundred casualties, military personnel, but also civilian casualties due to the fact that the Houthis have fired unguided mortars and missiles across the border. So it shouldn't be a surprise that Saudi Arabia wants this violence to come to an end as soon as possible.
Catherine, certainly the oil price is down. We know that that's affected Saudi Arabia. They've put austerity measures in place. Do you think that these emails are legitimate, that they really do want to pull back in some respect from this war?
Well, I do think that there's an understanding now in Riyadh that this war in Yemen is a massive failure. I mean, you know, politically and on a humanitarian level, I don't think that anyone can justify anymore what is happening in Yemen. And I do appreciate the fact that, yes, you know, there has been tragedy on both sides of the border, I would say. But one should not shy away from the fact that, you know, Yemen today faces a famine and, you know, a cholera crisis and tremendous hardship because of Saudi Arabia's, you know, humanitarian blockade, because of Saudi Arabia carpet bombing of Yemen, and one cannot compare the two. One cannot compare, you know, the resistance movement's response to Saudi Arabia's aggression. So I think it's a little bit hypocritical to position Saudi Arabia as the victim here, or even to allege that Saudi Arabia has tried to broker peace. It's not really true, is it? When you have a war coalition systematically targeting civilians with call from the UN and other international agencies calling for, you know, a stop to this war, because communities are dying, people are dying on the ground, and want to remember this.
Baraa, you are Yemeni. Do you see Saudi as the victim here?
Well, I wouldn't put it in a way that, I mean, usually people would like to say who's the bad and who's the good. Like it's very clearly just black and white. It's much more complex than that. The situation which very clearly started in 2014, I think the Houthis didn't realize what does it mean actually to take control of a capital. And once you spoil a political process, the ultimate result is conflict. Now, there is definitely civilian casualties caused by the Saudi-led coalition, especially in the north of the country. But also, the Yemeni people have been also victims to the Houthis as well. In the central and southern part of the country, most of the civilians are caused by the Houthis. So it's not an issue if it's like who's the good and who's the bad. The situation is a little bit more complicated than that. What I know for a fact is actually, I think everyone is slowly starting to come to a realization that the military solution is no longer an option, that they need other alternatives. And I personally think that there needs to be a political solution, because we can't afford having a conflict for another year or two.
Stephen, you were ambassador to Yemen for 3 years. The fact that these emails exist and that they've been uncovered and published widely now, what message does that send, do you think? How will this be perceived in the region?
Well, first of all, I agree with all of our guests that I think if the Saudi leadership is not trying to find a way out of this war, it would be derelict in its responsibilities. It knows very well that this is it's an enormous cost being inflicted upon its reputation, on the region, on regional stability, and it needs to find a way, as our guests have already said, to move away from a military solution into a political end to this conflict. And that's going to require international assistance and a lot of collaboration on the part of nations, with an investment in seeing stability and security restored to Yemen, and therefore at the same time to Saudi Arabia, which is ostensibly the reason why the war began when Saudi and the Emiratis entered it in 2015.
Yeah. Well, now, Theresa May, the British Prime Minister, has told the Saudis that they should end their involvement in the Yemeni war. I've already touched on the oil price coming down, which has led to austerity measures within Saudi Arabia. And then there is, of course, that UN report out there, which says that Saudi is the leading cause of civilian deaths, more than 1,000 now, because of the aircraft bombing that has been going on. Let's just pause for a second and hear from the UN on what they have to say about that.
The coalition airstrikes continue to be the leading cause of civilian casualties. The catastrophe is entirely man-made and a direct result of the behavior of the parties to the conflict, including indiscriminate attacks. We have seen attacks on markets, residential areas, hospitals, schools, funeral gatherings, and even fishermen and small civilian boats at sea.
So that was the UN, but Catherine, in Brighton, in the UK, the Saudis have already come out and, speaking to Sky News in London, have said that they reject this report by the United Nations, saying that the UN didn't even bother to consult them on what they think is going on.
Well, of course they do. I mean, this is always, it's always the issue here. Whenever the UN is condemning Saudi Arabia for, its many and grave war crimes, then Riyadh has a problem and an issue with it, because, of course, it doesn't want to be portrayed, as being the villain in this dynamic of war. But I would say that reality on the ground is telling you, what is very reflective of reality. And the fact is that civilians have been targeted, whether the Saudi, wish to ignore it or not. This is a fact. People have died in their thousands, and those lives, should have been saved, and those deaths could have been prevented. And I'm not even talking about the cholera or the famine that is, currently decimating Yemen. We're just talking about war casualties here, and this is the problem. You have a war that has, gone on for over 2 years now, and because it is a military impossibility, then Riyadh has continued on pushing further and further to, the limit of the tolerable. And now the United Nations is actually pushing back and demanding that accountability be made.
Fahad, the United Nations is also saying to Saudi Arabia, you are responsible for 100% of rebuilding Yemen. Do you think that's part of it?
There's a temptation to portray the conflict in Yemen as a Saudi war against Yemen, and that's clearly not the case. This is, at the end of the day, this is a civil war that began months before Saudi Arabia ever got involved. The violence, the killing began in the middle of 2014. Saudi Arabia did not get involved until March 2015, and really it got involved as a last resort, and after it got an official response from the internationally recognized government of Yemen. Now, as I said earlier, Saudi Arabia is well aware of the burden and the toll, the heavy toll that the war has taken on the Yemeni population, and in that regard, it has taken some concrete measures to both alleviate the humanitarian toll. And actually, contrary, with all due respect to one of the guests, Saudi Arabia has been the top provider of humanitarian aid over the past 2 years. The King Salman Relief Center alone has provided $800 million worth of relief. If one takes into account total Saudi Arabian government support, That figure is closer to $8 billion because there's also been financial support of the central bank, support to refugees, and it has also taken measures to minimize civilian casualties. It has various mechanisms in place, and it has also sought and received the assistance of both the United States and the United Kingdom to help it minimize collateral damage. So it has taken many, many concrete measures to, like I said, minimize collateral damage and to alleviate the humanitarian toll that has happened over the past 2 years.
Okay, we need to take a break at this point. More of our conversation when we return. Stay with us. You're watching The Heat.